My ancestors were the Celtic people who lived in the British Isles long before Roman times. And this is one of their stories.
In the beginning there was the great egg, and inside it the promise of all life. When the shell cracked, the water of life began to flow, bringing with it the seeds of all things yet to come. First woman's body was made of the dirt of the earth. Her hair was the grass and moss. First woman became first mother, and she had many children. She called them her rainbow family. She taught them to live in harmony and balance. She gave them a dream of peace, and they were nurtured by her abundance. When First Mother knew her time had come and her tasks were finished, she began to change into something other than she had been. But before her rainbow family spread out across the earth, they promised First Mother, if she ever needed them, if ever she was threatened, they would reform the rainbow family, stand together, and give of their strength to protect First Mother, Mother of us all.
We are part of the rainbow family, you and I, and today the earth needs protection as never before. As we turn into the 21st century, people everywhere are beginning to recover their reverence for the earth, to draw meaning from an older world, the world of Gaia, the earth goddess. Several years ago, I was asked to make a film about the emerging women's spirituality movement in North America. The crew and I traveled to 8 countries. This is our last stop, Montreal, Canada, my home.
This is what they call journalistic.
That's it. Okay.
I found the women's spirituality movement not so much in temples or cathedrals, but with groups of women friends sharing food around the kitchen table.
Okay, and we can't eat while we're talking.
Of course we can.
No, that's it.
Five. So the main
Okay.
camera roll is
The 4-woman crew and I undertook this journey together, and we became close friends. We've been here all afternoon, talking about spirituality and our need to back away from the destruction we see all around us. Anne Cameron is a Canadian author.
If they push the button and they turn my grandchildren into carbon, turn the woman I love into a shadow on a wall of a house that will be vacant for 500,000 years, murder my mother and my aunts, and finally manage to silence me, I want you to know I'm going to take that very personal.
Most of us in this room have children, and much of our discussion today has centered on their future.
I remember what Thomas Bianyaka said. Don't do anything in your life that would harm anybody 7 generations down the line. And if we would only remember, we are not supposed to be the last ones.
What are we leaving our children? What am I leaving my granddaughter, Rosalie? What's in store for this generation, when already the ozone layer is thinning at an alarming rate? Their diapers are still intact in countless landfills around the world. And on some days, the air they breathe makes them sick. It's a world out of balance. I can't help but feel that what's missing is the female perspective on things.
We're going to throw our garbage away. Oh, where is away? Whatever you do with it, it's here. It has not gone away.
We are a diverse group here, but we all agree that caring about the earth is a political as well as a spiritual issue.
And I think it's really, really important to start to look at the fact that political change also has to be something that happens from the inside out. And that so many people think that political change is something that you do out there rather than something that you do in here. And anybody who struggles to reconnect.
Shulamit Leichman is therapist, counselor, and friend to many women in Montreal.
Is told that it doesn't fit into the real world. The real world is the one where you can bury nuclear waste because you have to, because you have it, because you need it.
It just reminds me of some of the teachings that I had been
Marilyn
given.
Johnson is a university advisor to Native students. She is a Métis. Her roots are Celtic and Ojibwe.
But if you're not going to go out there and help them, then at least don't go out there and harm them or hurt them.
Part of the reason that we understand the distortions that we see around us, as you were saying.
The Reverend Bonnie Burnett is a linguist and a part-time minister for the United Church of Canada.
But the way we alter those things are to plant our feet firmly on Mother Earth and address the political and economic structures that are going to make a change.
And we get comments like, profit, it's in the name of profit, or progress, or how can you possibly compare a frog's life to what people need?
We've now come to the point in history where we have to go out and act. We can't just stand back and just not harm the environment and hope it'll get better.
Without the realization that feminism is right when it says that your personal life is political, your political life is personal, and that where those two things come together, the personal and the political, is where your spirituality begins to grow. If you don't care that 15 million children are going to starve to death in the next year, and when you don't care that the frogs are dying, then that is original sin. That is the abomination in the eyes of her.
For centuries, her meant the goddess. Her religions began with human life. They followed the seasons, the tides, the moons. The crew and I traveled to San Francisco to find goddess traditions emerging in new forms. This spiritual movement of people is a grassroots network of thousands. Large groups and small all share in a common commitment to heal the earth. It's Halloween. Names of the goddess are heard again. Isis, Astarte, Diana.
Isis, Astarte, Diana, Hecate, Demeter, Kali, Inanna. Isis, Astarte, Diana, Hecate, Demeter, Kali, Inanna. Isis, Astarte, Diana, Hecate, Demeter.
Earth-based spirituality is one of the fastest-growing religious movements in North America today. This group, called Reclaiming, is a collective of pagans from all over San Francisco. Pagan comes from the Latin word pagani, and it means a person who lives in the country. Pagan activist and author Starhawk is a member of Reclaiming and a priestess of the old religion.
I grew up in the Jewish tradition, and I still feel very close to that tradition and very much a Jew. But when I got to be a little older, I felt there was something missing, and at that time I couldn't even really articulate exactly what it was. There was also kind of nowhere to go as a young woman who was very spiritual. You know, there was no outlet for it. There was, at that time, it never occurred to me to think of a woman being a rabbi. It just wasn't done. Now, 10 years later, it would have been very different. Now in the Jewish tradition, women are becoming rabbis and women are creating rituals.
This year for Halloween, Reclaiming is staging a large public ritual called the Spiral Dance, honoring the ancestors, the beloved dead.
Remembering those who died on the Middle Passage, who disappeared from forest, from village, who died in the stink of excrement and corpses. Those who died under the lash, died of rape. Those who fought and lost.
Within the new pagan movement is Wicca, the witches' religion. They honor all living and sentient beings. They live by a simple rule: do as you will, harm none. Their spirituality centers on the goddess.
In meadows dressed in green, she is seen.
Extra people, the office here.
There's many, many things that ritual does. For one thing, it gives us a chance to mark the important passages and transitions in our lives. You know, the passages of death, like with our Halloween ritual with the spiral dance, the life passages, the first blood of a young woman. Any important transition in life generates a ritual.
Committed to social change, members of Reclaiming are visible in their community. They lobby for women's issues, and they campaign for lesbian and gay rights.
A ritual is also a way in which we come together with other people in a community to celebrate. And it's a tremendous bonding force. Our society is so big and so disconnected that most of the time we don't have a sense of a public that can mark these events, that care. The broader women's spirituality movement, not just witchcraft, is not a mass movement in the sense that there is a great leader and masses of followers. You know, it is not a cult. There's no great guru.
While we were on the West Coast, we went to meet with Charlene Spretnak, who writes about the politics of women's spirituality.
We're very much involved in social change groups and people who are suffering because of the way North Americans live. Now, externally, that leads into the fact that we don't want to keep these ideas of women's spirituality just closed in our group. We think they have quite a bit to say about the way the world could be salvaged from the patriarchal, industrial, full speed ahead growth, mindless growth paradigm, I would say. And so we feel we are a cultural force.
Sisters, how will you reclaim the earth?
Everywhere we went, women were meeting in small groups. Most celebrate full moons, solstices, and equinoxes. For some, it's an antidote for these troubled times. For others, it's an occasion to give support to the earth and to each other.
Every month, someone will say, I'm really going through a very difficult time now. I lost my job and I don't feel too good about myself. Then we'll create the kind of healing ritual that would be needed to help her at that time. Or someone else would say, I just had something really good happen to me and I don't want this to go unmarked. And we can really celebrate for people too, because that's difficult in this culture, you know. Am I not being nice to want to celebrate something? Is that too demanding? So with this group, everything is very much safe space. And it's a time for strengthening and healing and really encouraging each of us to go further and further in our work.
Releasing linear time.
Working with my friends.
Yeah, working in groups, working in consensus.
Releasing fear.
Midwife, nurse, teacher, musician, artist, counselor, and mother all spoke of how their circle strengthens them to break the bonds of hierarchy and domination in their lives.
You know, I'd like to talk about power, you know, that there's power over, which is the kind of power we're used to thinking about, and then there's power that comes from within, that is closer to spirituality. We very rarely see women of power who look just like ordinary women look. You know, we need the kind of images of the old goddesses that say, hey, there are many sorts of beauty, there are many sorts of power. And primarily we need images that say women's power, female power, the power of bringing life into the world in many ways, not just physical birth, but all of our creativity is what we need in the world. It's not something to be feared.
The more I learned about the goddesses of my own ancestors, the more I became aware of living goddess traditions that remain unbroken even today in India and Africa, and among native people everywhere. I met Kali in my yoga class, and Tara where I go to sit meditation. Each goddess, each tradition I encountered opened new dimensions of knowledge and power for me, new sources of understanding. Oakland author Louisa Tish is a priestess in the African Yoruba tradition. She teaches goddess lore at a local college.
Once upon a time, there was a beautiful woman by the name of Yemaya, who looked into the waters of the ocean, and there she saw her own reflection, and she said, "Who is that beautiful woman? I thought that I was the prettiest thing that the world had ever seen." There came that rumbling in her belly, and it grew and it grew and it grew till it exploded. And before her stood thousands of beautiful women. "Who are you beautiful women? I thought that I was the loveliest thing that the world had ever seen." And the women looked deep into the eyes of Yemaya, and there they saw their own reflections, and they said to her, "You are. We're just you."
I'm not really interested, and I don't think anyone in women's spirituality is interested in forcing any metaphors on people. The goddess is a metaphor for the divine, just as God was, and the earth as female is a metaphor. What we really would like to get across is reverence for the earth, and that there is divinity in this life.
Charlene, Louisa Tish, and Starhawk have all lectured at this Institute for Culture and Creation Spirituality, founded by Dominican priest Matthew Fox.
What a lot of people forget is they think that ecumenism means Protestants and Catholics having tea together, or if you're really far out, Catholics and Buddhists praying together. Again, they've forgotten the women's religions. When we use the word world religion today, every one of them that we have in mind is a religion that grew up during the patriarchal times. I also believe, if I could say so, I believe that the concept of the goddess, the stress it puts on the individual divinity of everybody, this again is a rich tradition even in Christianity, and I compare it very closely to the tradition of the cosmic Christ, because the cosmic Christ teaches that there's a Christ in every being. There's a divinity in every being.
The imagery of the female that brings life into the world represents that our focus is on the sacred in the world, not outside the world. For me, the goddess is immanent. She is the world. She is us. She is nature. She is the changing of the seasons. She is the earth herself. It's as if the whole universe were one living being that we are all a part of. And that's what we call goddess. God, what is sacred, which ultimately means what is valuable, is found outside the world. It's very different if you say goddess is immanent, is in the world, then everything in the world has its own inherent value.
So I think, frankly, the survival of the earth today depends on an earth consciousness, that we move beyond nationalism, for example, to a sense of bioregionalism and of earth survival, that we move beyond the dualisms of so-called first world, third world, north-south, communist, socialist, capitalist. It's all over with. And the only future I think the planet has is a spiritual awakening that's global. Global, but of course local. And this is why I think the earth religions are coming forth with their wisdom at this time in history.
Still to us, the earth is a healer, our teacher, our mother. She's a weaver of a web of life that keeps us all alive. She gives us the vision to see through the chaos. She gives us the courage, it is our will to survive.
When I returned to Canada, I discovered there was a wide difference of opinion about the goddess.
Oh yeah, goddess is as much a non-term to me as God is. Now I know I say that because I live in the 20th century and that might not be something that goddess worshippers or witches or women in past centuries would agree with.
I have real trouble with it because it feels as though once again we're being encouraged to disassociate ourselves from our responsibility to our own lives, to disassociate ourselves from taking an active part in our own existence. At the same time, I feel very comfortable with the idea that she as a force, as an energy, as a collection of various once mortal spirits, the crone, the collector, the gatherer, the one who gets you when you're dying, consoles you, heals you, and gets you in shape to come back again. I feel comfortable with her because I think she's my grandmother.
The problem is the repression of the entire history and movement of women's generation of God in their own image. Mm-hmm. What we have now is men's generation of God in his own image.
If I have to use the terminology of goddess, I would say to me it means wholeness. And it's the thing that I work with my clients all the time, is making yourself whole again, whether the damage is internal or it's been done to you externally. And if you can make yourself whole, then you also know how to make the earth whole, because the two go hand in hand.
We traveled to Greece, eager to see what was left in the home of Demeter and Persephone, Hera and Aphrodite, the goddesses I knew from Greek mythology. Goddess images fill museums, but they are often unnamed or labeled female figurine. There was no title for this triple goddess who presided over birth, mating, and death. A pre-Christian trinity, she is the maiden, the mother, and the crone. Women were once honored as exemplars of liberty, destiny, and wisdom. The goddess Demeter ruled all growing things, and her daughter Persephone brought forth the spring.
I think we can't really understand, because our cultures are so secularized on the surface level, what it means that divinity is of one sex, the male sex. what it means that males are the same sex as God. This is a very, very deep lesson that children pick up on as soon as they're inculcated into society, and it stays with us from cradle to grave. People today will say, well, how quaint, what does that have to do with our situation? Well, an awful lot. If we can just get a quarter of the reverence for the earth that our ancestors felt, that will be no small victory in this culture. In my opinion, you can envision the earth any way you like as long as you have reverence for the earth, which is what is missing today. We have nothing but contempt and this domination paradigm to have control over the earth. There's an unfolding story of the planet Earth and the cosmos, and we as a species have a role. And that was obviously a message of goddess spirituality.
Learning about our lost heritage is what I've enjoyed most about making this film.
Because I come from a people to whom fresh, clean water was a place of power. We didn't worship the water, but we did honor the water, and we worshiped what that water represented. We were the people of the land. There are Celtic stories as to how we got our totems, which we no longer know. That there was an otter clan, there was a whale clan, there was an eagle clan, and when you get beyond the building of churchianity and get into the religions of the people, I don't care where on the face of the earth you go, that religion was the same. It was creation honoring, it was woman honoring, and it was earth nurturing.
England in the spring, the ancestral groves, where ancient roots nourish new life. Earth mounds, great circular ditches, and standing stones pay homage to the old idea that people are the guardians of the earth. The power of Stonehenge is experienced by people of all faiths. It stands on Salisbury Plain, once England's spiritual heartland. 4,000 years ago, it was a place of ceremony and ritual. All of us, whatever our race or culture or religion, have forebears who were pagan, who honored the earth. Mr. Cooper has been guarding Stonehenge for over 15 years. How do you feel about it yourself, working here?
Well, when you're dealing with your heritage, you know, what do you do? It belongs to you, it belongs to me, it belongs to everyone. Now, I've done this with full moon and every time, you know, everywhere, all hours of the night. And I think the energy here is good. After 15 years now, and I've got to retire, you know, no. I'll retire, but I'll be here.
In England, as in North America, women are gathering together again. We spoke with historian Pauline Long in Glastonbury, a place of the old goddess religion.
Some women, some feminists, very active feminists, say, look, we don't care about the goddess one way or the other. We've got plenty to worry us, to fight for. Why bother with all this? But what I say is that when you get into understanding that we were not always oppressed, that we were not always subordinate, that there was a time when we had special status, I won't say that we were more important, but we were not less important, and we had women's values.
Intuition, dreams, and prophecies are part of women's culture. Hill of Vision, Glastonbury Tor is a monument to the magic of King Arthur's time. The legends of Avalon echo myths of early goddesses and gods, and tell tales of the power of their priestesses. Priestesses still live in Glastonbury, but they are very much women of the modern world.
When the feminist movement, or rather this new incarnation of the feminist movement started, I was, of course, there, although I was very worried about getting into it at first because I was much older than most of the women in it. In fact, I knew nobody of my age. I was then about 50. And it was my daughter-in-law who went to meetings, and she said, "You ought to come." And I said, "I can't come, I'm 50. And she said, "You come." She said, "You can learn from us and we can learn from you." And I've kept that as my banner, and that was the first sisterhood.
We were invited to join the circle for May Day, or Beltane, as it is called in the Celtic.
And it's the day the goddess rises. She came up in the spring at the equinox, and now she's arising in her flowers, and we see her flowers everywhere. And we come to celebrate her. We celebrate the end of the winter, the end of her being in the underworld. And we remember too the seeds that we've planted in ourselves. So now's the time for us as women to flower in our creations and our projects and in ourselves.
We cleansed ourselves of winter's decay. From decay comes rebirth, the ritual honoring of a timeless cycle.
Back to Mother Earth from whence she came. All blessings and all love, all of us.
I think it's very important to look at the fact that people need ritual. And once we understand that, once we accept that, once we comprehend that ritual also happens in nature. You know, the moon has a ritual.
The crew and I were always a little uncomfortable with the rituals we filmed, but Shulamit sees ritual as a creative force.
And in some ways it made sense because they were the very women who had been the most let down by society, by the systems, by the churches, by our God the Father, by the schools. The little girls who'd been hurt over and over and over again would bring things like crystals into my office, and I think, well, what's this? You know, what am I supposed to do with this? And these were the women who began to tell me that they had gone to a witches' meeting or that they had gone to a chanting weekend. And I would sort of sit there and think, oh, you know, there's something might be wrong with these people. Until I began to understand that they were looking for something and that they had a form of self-expression that was self-healing. And that the healing was a part, what had to do with the ritual.
This beribboned marriage ceremony harkens back to a time when couples celebrated their union unfettered by church or state. It's summer solstice, and all across North America, hundreds of similar pagan festivals, like this one in Wisconsin, are taking place. These kinds of gatherings provide a safe place for pagans to come together openly. During the Middle Ages, it was the rural people who resisted Christianity the longest, and prejudice still lingers around the word pagan. A popular slogan around camp is "No more witch hunts." We met with journalist Margot Adler. Her survey of today's pagan movement identifies hundreds of thousands of practicing pagans, people who gravitate to pre-Christian traditions of Europe and Greece, Africa, and Egypt.
So there's a commitment to freedom and diversity and different pathways as being appropriate for different people. That it may not be appropriate for you, for example, to be a goddess worshiper. That I would be perfectly willing to say that I am a part of this goddess religion, that I'm a pagan, that I'm a witch, and I would think that it would be perfectly appropriate for your spiritual path to be somewhere else. And I think that tolerance and that understanding that there are many different peoples in the world, there are many different species in the world, the earth to survive has to rely on a certain kind of diversity. And one should not be afraid of that. Because I think that if we are facing one problem as a planet, I think it's the fear of that complexity that is driving so many cultures, so many peoples into the exact opposite extreme of fundamentalisms of all different types. And I think the pagan perspective essentially is a cry against that.
The festivities will go on all week. Starhawk has traveled from San Francisco. Early this morning, women gathered here to prepare for the moment of solstice.
I think for most of us, as we grow older and as we attempt so many things concretely in the world, we end up separating ourselves from that original sense of at one-ment with the natural world. So when I say that ritual ends our alienation from the planet, what I think is that it returns us to what we really are. It returns us to the place where we are really connected with each other, with the universe, with nature.
Feel the energy. Draw it all the way up from that very core of fire at the center of the earth, all the way up through your body and out through your hands and around the circle on your hands, and feel it move up through your neck and your throat and out the top of your head like branches that reach up to the sky and sweep back down to touch the earth again.
Lady, lady, lovely lady, are you from an ancient star? Lady, lady, blessed lady, come to us from where you are. Magic sister, mother, daughter, tell us what will come to pass. You are moon, earth, and water. You are here with us at last. Lady, join us in our circle. Lead us in the spiral dance. When you speak, your magic words will send us all into a trance. Lady, lady, lovely lady, are you from an ancient star?
This small boy and silver crescent moon hold Mexico's most famous icon. The brown-skinned Virgin of Guadalupe endures as a goddess tradition in the hearts and minds of the people of Central America. I have close ties to Mexico. 2 of my children were born here. And it is where I finally understood the power of ritual to sustain and nurture a culture that has survived against all odds. After the arrival of the conquistadors and missionaries in the early 16th century, people were burned at the stake for performing their traditional ceremonies. My ancestors in Europe were also persecuted. Yet the dance goes on. Mexico was the site of many highly evolved civilizations at the time of contact with Europeans. Some were peaceful, some warlike. Some revered god kings, others worshiped goddesses. To the conquistadors, they were all the same, pagans. Within 200 years, millions had died. The land suffered too. Today, only 10% of Mexico's forests are intact. The long fingers of exploitation in the name of progress remain. Mexico City is so polluted that at times children are forbidden to run in schoolyards. The conquest of Mexico will always haunt me.
The more I learn about pre-churchianity, Celtic tribalism, the more comfortable I am with Native American pre-churchianity, because it is the same thing. The realization that we are born, we walk, we stumble, we die, we come back. A tree falls, that tree is not dead. It scatters seeds, it provides humus and moss. That tree does come back, and so do we. And that tree is alive the way I am alive, and it has as much right to be here as me.
Indigenous people have different languages, cultures, and traditions, but they all honor their old people for the wisdom of their years. Grandmother Twyla is an elder of the Seneca Nation.
We follow the history of the earth, and we are part of that history, whereas other cultures follow the history of mankind, and we don't feel that there's a foundation there.
Many stories say Old Spider Woman brought us into the light. She created all life, and even now she is spinning out our destinies.
It's a family structure. Everything in nature is a relative, and our lives are connected to this relationship. We look at the birds and all the animals as little brothers and sisters, so you cannot separate a family structure like that. The trees are our teachers, and the plants and everything are all relatives. We look at the earth as our mother.
The people of this pueblo say that they came out of the earth. They say they are the consciousness of the earth, that they are the eyes and voice of the earth. Taos, New Mexico is the oldest continuously inhabited pueblo in North America. The people who live here are separated by thousands of miles from the Iroquois Confederacy and the Seneca Nation. Despite the distance, they have common beliefs.
Well, sacred for me, of course, is the earth. And the next thing is the sacred for me is that I have a body that my spirit is housed within, and that I have a center that I need to keep centered. And that's my sacredness.
The Navajo, Hopi, and Pueblo people who occupy this region are beneficiaries of one of the great spiritual traditions of humankind. These ruins at Chaco Canyon were the ancestral home of the Anasazi Nation, one of the great mother societies. Here, human and divine were fused in a way that we, with all our science and technology, seem unable to understand. These pueblos, these specific places are sacred. From Big Mountain in Arizona to the Great Whale River in Canada, Native people are fighting to protect their lands, the basis of their culture and spirituality.
Spirituality is an inner feeling of truth. Truth has a constant energy that is within us at all times. We feel that when we come into this earth walk, the truth is encoded within our center, and all the questions are there and all the answers. And we spend our life, our earth walk, asking these questions and seeking the answers. If the Earth Mother is on the danger list, so are all the other creature beings that are part of her family. If humankind have been naughty and they have been doing things against Earth Mother, they're only ringing the bell on their own death. I get a big kick out of people coming around and they'll say, well, what can we do to heal Mother Earth? Heal yourself, we tell them.
So I draw on the information and the power from my ancestors from the spirit world. So even when I live in this city in downtown Toronto, I still can look around and say, yes, I can still feel that energy coming out of the earth and into me.
I don't think that it has to be like this new age crap of going to exotic places to get in touch with whatever it is you're getting in touch with. Just take your shoes off and walk on the grass. Sit down, and there's this defenseless part in the small of your back. Put it against a tree.
While in New Mexico, I went to see my friend Tita. Tita is a midwife and avid gardener. Today, her understanding of birth, flowers, roots, and herbs enrich her life. In 16th century Europe, such knowledge might have brought charges of witchcraft.
I feel so comfortable with gardening. I can't imagine a more pleasurable thing to do. On the one hand, in a very simple way, it's such good exercise, getting out there in the sun and the growing vegetables for my family and the herbs. I think they bring out the healer in me.
Like Tita, I find my spiritual practice to be more solitary. Tita works with a group once a week to explore movement and dance as a way to get in touch with instincts they've forgotten.
I think that what we refer to as a feminine aspect of spirituality is that aspect of spirituality which relates to our bodies and the earth. Probably one of the things that occurred during the time of the burnings was that women were made to mistrust each other. I mean, it was like a whole reprogramming of women at that time. We have to work very, very hard to go right back at the level beyond thought to erase that corrupt imprinting. Women were stripped of all of their contacts with any kind of power. We have to get back to where we can trust each other. All of the women's group efforts that are going on are mainly to learn how to trust one another, to work together.
A lot of ground today. Just the touching of hands. Touching of hands is really something that I had an experience when my mother died, that people said to me, you know, it's okay, you still have relationship after death. And it was okay, except that I couldn't feel her hand anymore. And I realized how important the touching of hands was.
Barbara Peckeridge uses gesture, sound, and dance in her healing work with people who are terminally ill.
one of the gifts that I was given from my mother while she was dying was to be able to see what one reflects on in their life when they know that they're leaving. And over again she would say to me, Barbie, you know, the times that I love the most were the times when I was alone with nature, when I was out in the woods, or when I was able to walk through the aspen trees by myself. When she was dying alone. The image I had was the way one lives, the gestures one accumulates, the way one moves through life is perhaps a slow motion of how one dies one's death. To maybe know that while we're living, that we are going towards that moment, and that to love is really all there's time for.
In the time it has taken to make this film on women's spirituality, I have come full circle. Back to my Celtic beginnings. Back to an understanding that the earth is alive. Its life beats in my heart and flows through my veins. Through all the forms of ritual and the varied philosophies I've encountered on my way, one truth stands out. No matter who we are or where we live, we all stand on common ground. Our planet, Earth.